Earlier this month, the Malaysian government announced that the seabed search for MH370 would restart on December 30th, and it looks like that is exactly what is happening. Right about now, as I'm recording this on December 30th, 2025, the Ocean Infinity Marine Survey vessel Armada 8605 is pulling up to the search area where it will deploy its underwater robots to acoustically scan the seabed. The area that they're planning to search is relatively small. It's just 10,000 square kilometers compared to about 250,000 square kilometers that they searched during their earlier phases during 2014 to 2018. That implies that they think they have a pretty specific idea of where to look. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about how they got to the search area, where exactly they'll be looking, and what likely comes next. I'll also be talking with 777 pilot and podcaster John Waters about the seabed search and about his perspective on the mystery. That's all coming up right now. Hi, everybody. Jeff Wise back with you for another episode of Finding MH370, the podcast where we do a deep dive into every aspect of the technical evidence to solve aviation's greatest mystery. When I made the last episode 2 weeks ago, Armada 8605 had just set sail from a Benoa port on the island of Bali. It had conducted some sea trials and it was heading directly toward the search area. Given its speed and the distance involved, it looked like it was on track to get to the search area early. That's not what happened. Instead, the search changed course. Instead, it sailed down to Fremantle, Australia. We don't know exactly why they had a change of plan. It might have to do with weather, but at any rate, it's worth noting that Fremantle is a port that Ocean Infinity has used in the past as a place for resupplying MH370 search operations because it is the nearest port to the search area. So the ship arrived there on December 23rd. It didn't actually go into the port. It was anchored offshore. Then after just a few hours, it headed out again. So literally just a pit stop. It might have been taking on more fuel in order to extend its time out in the search area. After it left port, it spent some time conducting more sea trials out over an area where some test targets had been deployed on the deep seabed. This is a way for the crew to make sure that the seabed scanning robots were all in good operational order. And then they set out at a good clip for the search area, as you can see in this video from Marine Traffic. Here's an image that Kevin Rupp posted showing how the ship is approaching the search area. Kevin, by the way, is an excellent source of information about the seabed search. He has a good relationship with Ocean Infinity, and his guesses and intuitions about what's going to happen next very often turn out to be correct. I'll put a link in the show notes to his Facebook and Twitter accounts. I'll also recommend Don Thompson and Jay Lowe. I'll provide links to their stuff as well. Now, this track, I'll say, is very interesting because it provides a really powerful clue as to what Ocean Infinity is going to do next. As you can see, it's heading right for this spot north of the lower set of squiggles here. Now, the upper set of squiggles is where another Ocean Infinity ship, Armada 7806, carried out a seabed search in March. It was taking a closer look at gaps in the search data from a seabed scan that had taken place years before. There was some uncertainty as to whether the wreckage was there but just got missed because of data holidays, or maybe it was behind in the shadow of some rocks or something. So they searched that area. Obviously, it wasn't there. Then they searched this lower area, and this is an area that lies outward from the seventh arc from previously searched areas. This means that to get there, the plane must have glided for a fairly considerable distance after running out of fuel. During that scan in March, they looked at an area that had been suggested with a fair bit of fanfare by two French researchers, Marchand and Blely. They pretty much proved that that idea was wrong. Now they're going to continue working their way northward along a strip that Victor Ianello suggested on his blog a few years ago. If they follow Victor's recommendation, they'll go for another maybe 170 kilometers in that direction, meaning they'll search an additional 5,000 square kilometers or so. Remember, the Malaysian government said that Ocean Infinity will spend 55 days carrying out this search, but those 55 days will not be continuous. So we shouldn't expect that this plan is going to be carried out in the next 2 months. It could be stretched out over the whole of 2025, whole of 2026, or maybe even beyond that. So that's where we stand right now. Going forward, I'll try to keep pace with developments as they occur. If you want to get an email when I post new content, do head over to the show page at findingmh370.com, where you can sign up for a free newsletter that goes out with each episode. Okay, now I'd like to do something that I haven't done for a while on this podcast, which is to bring in an outside expert to share his knowledge of a particular aspect of this case. John Waters is a former F-16 pilot who now flies 777s for a freight carrier. He has excellent knowledge of this aircraft and its systems. He also has his own aviation podcast that he interviewed me for because he was interested in MH370. So it's really a two-way interview. He's posting an edit on his YouTube channel, and I'm posting mine here. To start, he asked me about the seabed search, and I gave my overview of what's going on.
It's still mind-boggling to me that in 2025, as we approach in 2026, the fact that an airliner disappeared basically off the face of the earth with hundreds of people on it, and we can't seem to solve this mystery. But you've done a lot of research into it and have some theories, and I do find them fascinating. So again, I look forward to kind of diving in and get some updates for today.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting time again. Everything had gone very quiet on MH370 front for a long time. The plane vanished in 2014. There was a search on the seabed that the officials, the Australian government basically paid for a Dutch company to search the seabed. They didn't find anything. We assumed that was it. They looked where the calculations of these weird signals said it was supposed to be. Then this private company called Ocean Infinity stepped forward and, with a very unusual offer, said to the Malaysian government, "We will look for this for free, and you only have to pay us if we find it." And they searched an area that was as big as the original search area. Again, didn't find it, stopped. And really, I think it was reasonable to think. Basically, the way the Malaysians left it was, we will look again if there is significant new information.
Okay.
And there just wasn't. I mean, there was no new. There was actually something. There was a lot of media attention on this guy who's kind of a hoaxer, who's presented himself as a aeronautical expert, but really isn't. He came up with this theory that got a ton of media. The media doesn't have the subject matter expertise to really judge this for themselves. So if somebody who sort of presents himself as being a credible source says, "Oh, I have this new method for determining where the plane went," they really believed it. I mean, even the Australian government sort of put out a statement saying, "No, this guy is a credible source," which is very disappointing because one of the reasons this is still a mystery is that we live in a time of misinformation. And you hear about the bot networks that are always pumping out, false claims on Twitter or what have you. But there's a lot of people who are nominal authorities who are actually kind of operating in bad faith. It's a bit terrifying, frankly. But to make a long story short, they didn't find it, but then they said that they were going to restart the search anyway. They made an announcement a year ago, last December, that they were going to start looking again. It wasn't until March of this past year that they actually put the boat out into the search area. Spent about a month looking, searched about 5,000 square kilometers, which is a pretty small area in the grand scheme of things. And then they left again, and a lot of people were disappointed. And they said it was for bad weather because the seasons are reversed down in the southern hemisphere. But now they're back. They're actually the ship. The update I have for you is that there's a new ship, they just built it this year. This company, Ocean Infinity, is expanding. The money behind it are these sort of billionaire investors. It's not really entirely clear what their whole strategy is. They're kind of secretive. There have been some big articles about them. Business Week did a big article about them, about who they are and everything. But they've when they first made that offer, it was a brand new company, and they only were renting ships from someone else. Now they not only have a fleet of over a dozen ships, but they're building kind of state of the art, high technology, semi robotic. These ships can operate without a crew, which is, to me, like, I don't get it. Like, if you're out in the middle of the ocean and like there's nobody there to fix the broken widget, like what do you do? I'm I guess behind the times. That's how they do things these days. They've got a very small area to look in. It's not really 100% clear to me why they think their odds are that good, but they think they're good enough anyway. My suspicion is that they have this equipment, and they might as well use it if they haven't got a gig. I mentioned they have a fleet of more than a dozen ships, and
Right.
so all of these ships are deployed around the world. They'll might survey for future oil exploration, or maybe they'll check on a oil pipeline or something. Whatever deep sea research and maintenance vessels do, they're doing. But if you're in between gigs, you might be like, well, we've got a month, we've got nothing to do. Let's send the ship down there and check it out.
I was curious because, again, outside, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it'd be a booming business to make these heavy investments, but maybe pipelines, cables, and things like that. So, do you know, is there new technology that might help them see further, see clearer? Or again, are they just, from what you understand, they're just think they might have a better shot and are going out there to try it again? What's your assessment?
So there is new technology, and somewhat surprisingly, technology has kind of come a long way from when they first started searching. The very first search that the Australian government funded was carried out by the Dutch, and they would basically tow this underwater sled that sent out these acoustic pings. And it's a bit like ultrasound, when you get your baby, a picture of your baby in the mother's womb. It's basically taking photographs with sound, you could think of it as. And they would tow it. And, towing is like mowing a lawn. It's very rigid. You go up, you go down, you go back and forth. It's very monotonous. And then when Ocean Infinity went back, they used a really different technology. They have these things called AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles. They're robot subs, and they look like bright orange torpedoes. And they basically lower them into the water. They swim away, and because of the latest technology, they actually know where they are, even though they're 3 miles down in the darkness of the ocean, and they can coordinate to sort of form a pattern like a wolf pack down there. And so they can work together to scan much more quickly. So they were able to do in a couple months the same area that the earlier effort had done in like 2 years. And the new version uses presumably whatever the upgrades are in the meantime. But it's not actually faster, which was a little bit surprising to me. The initial search was using, I forget, was it 6 or 8 of these things working together? The new efforts, which started in March and is about to continue in January, they only use 3. And part of that is because the vessels are a little smaller. These are the Ocean Infinity's own ships. They can probably operate them more cheaply, according to their own balance sheet. And so they're using vessels that aren't really optimized for scanning large areas of the seabed. And so I think that's why it's not quite so fast. Now, and the point that I make to people is, yes, the technology is new, but you're not going to see anything that isn't there. Like, that's the key to success isn't having new technology. The key to success is having the plane be there. And a question that a lot of people always ask me, I get this all the time, is, well, what if it's there but they miss it? And that's a question that the search authorities actually spent a lot of time thinking about. What if it's like in a gully? If there's like a gully on the seafloor, or it's behind the shadow of a big rock or something like that. And that there was actually, they went back and they did a review of the data long after the fact. And there were indeed areas where maybe the uplink cable is on the fritz for a second. And so you've missed that patch or something. There are little hills. I mean, one thing that I think people should be aware of is that the seabed is not like the surface. On the surface we get all kinds of weathering. Anytime there's water flowing, you've got like gullies forming and all kinds of topological features, trees, buildings. There's none of that on the seabed. It's pretty much just flat. And so it's like if you put your keys on a pool table, right? And then you photograph the pool table, you're going to see the keys. Like, there's no way you're going to miss it. And some people say, well, it's very muddy. There's like a thick layer of sediment on the seabed. And that is true. It's kind of goopy down there. But these plane crashes have happened enough that when they sink to the bottom, you can indeed see them. So that's not really a concern. So I think that given the nature of how they're looking for it, given the nature of the environment, if it was there, they would have seen it.
Okay. So this would be good. Maybe just we talked about it in depth on the last podcast, but maybe we just recap a little bit of why they're searching in this area, maybe some of your theory on it. Some of the theories are out of like where this plane went, because there's obviously a lot of ocean out there and we have no idea. So maybe let's just recap a little bit of like how we got to this point.
Sure. Well, it's a long story. I'll give you the super bullet point version of it. The plane took off after midnight on March 8th, 2014, flew off to the northeast towards Beijing. 40 minutes into the flight, just as it was passing the last waypoint in Malaysian airspace, like within seconds, it went electronically dark. They later found tapes or whatever. They realized that it was recorded on primary radar, taking a U-turn, going up the Malacca Strait, leaving primary radar, and then, because when you're no longer being painted by the radar, you're not seen anymore. You're invisible, and so it had vanished. And then 3 minutes later, 2 minutes later, or something, it suddenly appears in a whole different way, which is that it starts sending these satellite signals to a company called Inmarsat, which is a satellite communications company. And so the thing that, and this is where I really value your expertise, the thing I wanted to ask you is, you probably have never flown a plane in which you've turned off the transponder, the ADS-B, you've gone electronically dark, and then you turn on the SATCOM. Like, a plane would really normally never fly in that configuration, right?
I would say that's a fair statement, especially in again, I fly the 777, right?
Yeah.
You are not turning stuff off unless it's intentional, right? When you're going long range cruise, everything is basically set once you've taken off. You're obviously manipulating the control panel for altitude. Maybe you're going direct to waypoints and things like that. But, inherently everything is set and you're not changing anything. I will say this last trip, especially in some regions of the world and to maybe where MH370 was operating, you'll get GPS jamming. And so we actually inhibited our GPS just because of the GPS jamming that was going off, and then utilizing ground-based nav aids from where we were in this region, which, again, it was in and around there. But again, you're not turning off ADS-B, turning off transponder, and then initiating your SATCOM and doing things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think I think something that a lot of people don't really get because they're not pilots. The story has been told as if this happened and then this happened and this happened, and okay, I guess that's what happens with planes. I think the media has done a really bad job of trying to convey is that what happened was really, really unusual. Like, there's a part in the FCOM that says, you are forbidden to pull circuit breakers unless you are directed to do so by a checklist. Like, you just don't go freelancing and just pulling things willy-nilly. Like, it's dangerous and it doesn't serve any purpose. Like, a plane is a complicated mechanism. You don't just push the buttons to see what'll happen, right?
Well, especially in modern planes, especially like the 777.
Yeah.
That is not part of the training. So in my 3,000 or so hours in the 777, I've pulled one circuit breaker, and that was over Australia where we had one of our FMCs was not working properly. But that's one of those. We call back via SATCOM to the maintenance operation facility, actually get a technical pilot on the line as well. We've run through the available checklist for that, and then maintenance directed to pull that circuit breaker, right? But it was a process. It was a 30-minute process where you're not just kind of willy-nilly versus, the time in the F-16. There are times where, you're mayor of Cockpit City, you're running the checklist,
Right.
and you're pulling circuit breakers and resetting stuff just based on known issues and troubleshooting, trying to isolate things. But in the civilian aviation world, airliner world, that is not something you're doing. Also, where you kind of said too, like the abnormal piece, just doing a 180 or turning around at a waypoint without talking to anyone, without squawking emergency, is very abnormal.
Right.
Like you wouldn't do that. That's a significant thing to do in this airliner world.
Okay, so the reason that they're searching in the seabed is because, as I said, after they left primary radar, very soon after they left primary radar, this box got turned back on. It's called a satellite data unit. It lives kind of in the dorsal area of the fuselage. It's above the economy class passenger cabin. And that got turned back on. And for a long time after the plane disappeared, I asked every single 777 pilot, how do you reboot the SDU? And you can tell me what your answer would be.
Did anyone get it right?
Well, the thing that everyone said is, what is the SDU? Like not.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not something that you normally talk about. Like it turns on when you turn on the plane.
Yeah, there's so much that you don't have access to as a pilot. Now, granted, you have the circuit breakers over your head. If you were to tell me, turn off the SDU and try what is that? Have we not talked about this before? There's just not something. And I would venture to say technical pilots probably know that and deal with it. But your average, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say my buddies who I fly with, if we presented them with that challenge, they would probably respond like I would. And they're much smarter than me. But still, it's just not something you don't manipulate that.
Yeah, and I talked to Ron Rogers in an earlier episode where I said to him, I asked him the same question, and he's got tens of thousands of hours, and he actually was involved in, I think he was working for United when they accepted the 777, and so they had actually their own test flight program. They wanted to sort of put it through its paces and understand it for their own purposes, and he was working with Boeing engineers. Because if you as a pilot have a question, like, how do I do this? Or like, what is it? You don't just go, looking through the technical manuals. You would ask an engineer whose job it is to know, because you want to be right. It's important to be right. But so what you and I are talking about right now, John, is I think a really crucial and overlooked aspect of this case, which is that something happened which is really weird. It's really unusual, and it's being treated, that aspect has been glossed over, where people are just like, and then the SDU got rebooted. And I've been saying, wait, stop. That's really weird. That's really bizarre. That's not something that would ever happen normally. And we have to, and so then, because the entire mystery then turns on that fact. So then they have this new data. And it turns out that because this rather complicated system of sending, processing information on the plane, re-encoding it for satellite transmission, sending it up to the satellite, having it downlink back, and all the processing and all the recording and everything, because that system was not working in the way it was originally engineered to work, navigational information had kind of leaked into it. That wasn't supposed to. If the system was working as designed, there would be no hints of where the plane went. But there were. And because of... two weird things now. One, that the thing was turned on at all, having been turned off, which is also another whole weird thing. And now there's come to find, contrary to all expectation, there's actually information in it that we wouldn't expect to be there. Now, we have to derive a new sort of mathematical formula to figure out what it means. But once we figured out what it means, it tells us where in the seabed the thing is. And this is where I sort of parted ways with all my colleagues, because I'm saying to them, look, you're about to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a seabed search, which is predicated entirely on A very weird thing. It's a weird thing. And here's another thing, which is that it's weird and it's really hard to explain from the perspective of your own hypothesis. Now, what is your hypothesis? Now, I mentioned earlier that the thing went electronically dark within seconds of passing the last waypoint. Okay, so somebody is doing a bunch of things. They're turning things off. Most of all, they're flying the plane because they're doing this 180. And just 1 minute before that, we had heard the captain very calmly saying over the radio, "Good night, Malaysia 370." Now, he's calm. He doesn't sound like somebody who's got a gun to his head. So the assumption is, well, in a minute, somebody couldn't break through the cockpit door with fire axes without the flight crew making a mayday call, squawking hijack, whatever you would do, like presumably if someone's fighting you in the cockpit, especially post 9/11. So here's the assumption. Where do you fly a plane from? The cockpit. What's the total universe of all the places you can fly a plane from? The cockpit. That's it. That's your only choice. So you've got two people behind a locked door, like an Agatha Christie, mystery. It must be somebody that's in the manor house, right? And so it's either this highly experienced captain who's got over 10,000 hours, or it's the new guy who's just on his first official flight as a fully qualified first officer. So given how complicated all this is with all these boxes being turned off and on, it has to be the captain, right? And so everything that flowed from that, all of the assumptions are that it had to be the captain. He did all these crazy things. Okay, so why? Why would he do all these crazy things? It doesn't seem to make any sense. And you asked like you didn't know how to reboot the SDU. There's two ways to do it. One is to leave the cockpit, go to the area next to the first class lavatory, pull up the carpet, open the hatch, go down, go off to your left. There's a circuit breaker panel, and if you pull 3 circuit breakers, boom, this box goes dead, and then you can come back later and turn it back on if you want. That is a lot to do in the 1 minute between Goodnight Malaysia 370 and the thing going dark. So, and if it's done from the cockpit, what you have to do is to isolate the entire left AC bus. Now, you and I had talked earlier about how you're not supposed to pull a circuit breaker. Pulling a circuit bus, isolating a circuit bus is like pulling 30 circuit breakers all at once. Like that would be a really even more extreme, crazy thing to do, right?
It would. All right. So, one question, I'd like to put a pin in this, but
sure.
Real quick to address the search and why the search is occurring there. Is this, and I realize this is probably a generalization.
Sure.
And there's more detail to it, but they saw the search right there, the plane turns, and now it's based off of, hey, it had this much fuel on it, and it's flying this heading, so most likely it's going to land somewhere in this piece of ocean. Is that a fair assumption of why the search is, they're going out of Perth and they're searching that area, or is there more to that?
There's a little bit more to it. Well, there's a lot more to it, but I'll try to give you like a short version of it. Yeah. There was 2 kinds of metadata that had navigational information. One of them was it's called the BTO. It's the time. It's the time that it takes to send the signal and to receive the signal back. And that actually was operating normally, and that actually does tell you a lot about the where the plane went. So that, in a sense, is navigational information. And what you get is a series of rings, and pretty much every hour, because the SATCOM wasn't being used, somebody had turned it back on, but they weren't actually using it to send voice or data. It's like your cell phone if you don't use it. Like they just found that alleged pipe bomber. The way they found him was that his cell phone was pinging all these towers. Even when he wasn't making any calls, when you have a mobile communications device, it needs to, in order for it to work when you want it to work, it always has to be figuring out where it is and what tower it can use to communicate with. And so, anyway, in a sort of analogous way, this box every hour was checking in with the Inmarsat network via a geostationary satellite. And so you have these series of rings because the distance if you just know how far it is, you don't know where it is, but you know how far it is. The universe of all possible solutions is an arc essentially, the whole solution is a circle. But if like it can only fly so fast, so it could only go so far. Anyway, it turns out that if you look at those rings and you assume a speed, that tells you a route. The rings tell you the route. And if you allow certain variations in speed and you say, well, maybe the pilot wanted to change heading, there's various, if you allow changes in speed and heading, it becomes like sort of a fat line. There's a certain fuzziness to it. But the thing to know is that one of these, for every route that you make, there's a mirror route that goes the other direction. It's mirrored around the equator. And so this route tells you basically that it went to a certain part of the southern Indian Ocean. But it also tells you that it went north. It went north to Kazakhstan. And so in the first week after it disappeared, they didn't know which one was right. And so they started searching in the ocean, but they also started making inquiries, asking Kazakhstan, hey, have you seen this plane? So then there was another part of the data called the BFO, and that is very, very complicated. It's much fuzzier. It can actually be tampered with. And they use that to tell that the plane went into it was the southern solution was the correct one. So that's how they found, they wound up looking in the Southern Ocean. But it should have been a pretty cut and dried issue. They should have found it almost right away. And so they really don't have a good answer for why it's not there.
Yeah, again, assumption on my part. Based on that, you have time, you have the fuzzy route and the arcs. So you go to, in my mind, you go to the last point and you draw your 10,000 kilometer by 10,000 kilometer, whatever it might be. And it's going to be somewhere in this area.
Precisely.
Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And obviously we've searched there and they're going back to search in that same spot. So no different other than technology from what you can tell.
Right. And so because they've searched so the plane, it looks like from that BTO data, the BTO data really fits well with a plane flying at a normal cruise speed for a jetliner. And you fly a 777 commercially, and you probably get very strict instructions from your dispatch department about how what altitude you're supposed to fly, what speed you're supposed to fly. Because for airlines, there's like a math that's very fundamental to flight planning, which is what is fuel cost, what is the time of our crew cost. And so you kind of you can optimize and solve for like how fast should we fly. Because if oil is cheap and pilots are really expensive, you want to fly really fast because you don't care how much fuel you're going to burn. Right. And conversely, if you've crushed your union and the pilots are working for free and the gas is really, really expensive, you want to kind of go at your maximum efficiency speed. And so there is a certain amount of there's a number of different solutions you could have, but I forget exactly the point I was trying to make. But basically, there is a certain, because you don't know exactly how they flew or whether they changed headings a little bit. It could be in slightly different areas, but all of the good ones have been chosen. Oh, as I was saying, it looked like it was flying at a reasonable, in a straight line, because planes fly straight. If you're flying over the open ocean, like there's no sightseeing to be done, especially in the middle of the night. So just go to where you want to go. You're going to do it at your preferred airspeed. The airspeed can change as you get lighter. It actually gets more efficient to fly at a different speed. But whatever your sort of plan is, you carry it out. And it matches pretty well with that. And so when they first found the BTO data, they're like, oh, it's down here. It's far at the far end of the arc. And then they found this other data and they started to get confused and they started to look elsewhere. But they assumed that the part of the data made it look like the plane was in a very steep and accelerating dive. Like somebody had pushed the nose forward and was almost in a vertical dive. And so given that, and also the reason that the last ping was sent was that the plane had run out of fuel. Because it run out of fuel, the generator stopped working. The STU stopped sending these signals. And then there was a little bit of reserve fuel in the fuel line to the APU, the auxiliary power unit, which turned on, and then after it takes a little time to spool up, but it started sending signals again. So we know that when the last signal was sent, presumably, the plane had been out of fuel for a while. So it had been losing altitude, probably maintaining speed, depending on what it was trimmed at, but it was losing energy, inevitably. And you can glide really far, but it's a one-way street, right? And so because it appeared to be in a dive, they figured it must be pretty close to where that last signal was sent. But it wasn't there. So we know that supposition was incorrect. So he must have pushed it into a dive, then changed his mind and glided it, and then changed his mind again and crashed it because this plane was in little pieces. It wasn't like a Miracle in the Hudson situation. So in order to kind of retcon a theory that makes sense but also matches the data, we have to get into this crazy sequence of events that doesn't really make any real sense from a pilot's motivational perspective. So he flew for 6 hours doing nothing, not answering the phone, not sending any messages. And then he waits and waits and waits. This is a funny way to commit suicide, to wait and wait and wait and wait. And then when you run out of fuel, then push it down into the ocean, then change your mind again. And that's the only reason we have any chance of success right now. And the point I've been trying to make is that you guys need to acknowledge how friggin' weird this story that you're telling yourself is. And the reason you're telling yourself this story is because you can't imagine any other way, because you believe in your heart and soul with 100% conviction that the only way to fly a plane is from the cockpit. And my perspective is that is true for all airplanes except the 777. And the reason the 777 is different, and maybe there's others that I just don't know as well as 777, but it turns out that the 777 can theoretically be flown from the electronic space. This is a subject that I am going to hit mega hard in January. I've been doing some really, really fascinating research, and I'm going to explicate this more. I can't really say more right now, but I am going to kind of see if that is literally a load-bearing hypothesis. That it can only be this. Because the story that they're operating off of right now, as I said, is just really, really weird for so many reasons.
Right. I would agree with you. And again, would also noting the fact that people are weird and strange things happen. Mm-hmm. And we've seen in recent times and between this incident and last, where unfortunately there's been suicide committed by pilots, murder-suicide, mm-hmm. It usually is pretty quick. Mm. You know, someone gets up to go to the bathroom, door's locked, and then the action is pretty quick. You're not waiting
The slowest
hours,
one was Germanwings, where he set the autopilot for 0 altitude as they were approaching the Alps.
Right.
But then he just kind of sat there passively and let it descend in. But that was a matter of minutes, not hours.
Right. And granted, I mean, different environments, so you can make an argument. But again, I've never thought about suicide, but I can imagine that maybe people go through it. They have change of hearts and things like that. But
the suicide is one thing. Murder-suicide, which is what these cases all are, is a whole nother dimension of and you're suffering, sure, but why would you do that?
Yeah, for hours. So very weird. I agree with you on that. Which lends to maybe a further discussion on some of your theories about, as you've alluded to already, controlling the 777 outside of the cockpit.
Right.
That, all right, if this isn't the case, if it actually in fact was not the pilots flying out into the middle of the southern Indian Ocean, what else could have happened?
So very early on, like in the first half of 2014, I was asking, I felt like the question we need to ask is, to be responsible, we have to ask, is there any other way that this data could have been generated? And again, it turns out that in a lot of cases, it's not. There's only 2 companies that make the SDU. One of them is called Rockwell. And the way it generates this value is it receives the incoming value, compares it to what the value should be, adds that change in the value of the frequency and then sends it back out. So that's not, it can't really be changed, altered, or tampered with. However, that's not the box that this plane had. It had one from Honeywell or Thales, and it calculated that value based on its navigational information. And so theoretically, if you feed the box wrong information, you will get a wrong output. So I feel like it's pretty well established at this point that data can be spoofed. And I mentioned that the BTO data, which is really more robust and can't be spoofed, indicates that the plane could have gone to the southern Indian Ocean or Kazakhstan. Now, if the BFO data was spoofed, that means the plane went to Kazakhstan. And that was my theory. I'm like, well, is it possible that it went to Kazakhstan? Why would it have done that? Where exactly would it have gone? Are there places where it could have landed? And that's like a whole nother. The answer to all those things is yes. I mean, I think it all kind of makes a lot of sense, actually.
Okay.
But so as I've been seeing it for many years, is that given the data that we have, given our understanding of how it was generated, there's two distinct possibilities and no others. One of the big misconceptions about this case is that there's 100 theories as to what could have happened to it. And there are 100 ideas that people have talked about, but not every idea like really deserves the label of hypothesis. The idea that the moon is made of green cheese is not really a hypothesis because there's no evidence for it, and if you check it, you'll find it's not true. And so similarly, like a lot of people would like to think that it was a mechanical malfunction or something. It just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So there's two possibilities that really deserve the title of hypothesis. One is that the captain did it, and it's in the Southern Ocean. The other is that third-party hijackers took over the plane from the electronics bay and flew it to Kazakhstan. A lot of people hear that, even my own kids. My kids, by the way, my youngest is 14. He was a toddler when I started working on this. He spent his entire life that he can remember, Dad has been talking too much about this missing plane. And he's now old enough that he's like reading on it and like watching YouTube videos, and he's like asking me really hard-hitting questions. And I'm like, this is like, it's kind of great. It's kind of awful in a way. But
good.
the point,
poke holes at it.
He like pokes holes at it, which is fine. I mean, it's like one of the really awful things about MH370 is that so many people they get an idea and they just stick to it. They grab onto it and they get mad if you disagree with them. And that's not really how science works. You have to know that any theory can be wrong. And I think to understand a theory is to know how it could be wrong, and to ask the question, well, okay, what evidence can we gather? What questions can we profitably ask that would help us either increase the theory, the chance that this theory is right, or disprove it? How can I disprove it? What questions can I ask that will disprove this theory? There's an aspect of this case that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I've come to think of it as the central paradox, which is, okay, we know that all these crazy things happened, like, going dark, pulling the 180, the SDU being turned off and turned back on again. They all seem to be evidence of sophistication. It would have taken effort. It would have taken planning. It would have taken resolve. I did an episode called Mindhunter where I talked about like all of the kind of psychological characteristics that we can deduce from this happening. And they also speak to a level of deception. So this plane went dark at the very, very beginning, within the first few seconds of a 3-minute gap. Like there's minimum 3 minutes between when you say goodbye to one controller and hello to the next. So they've got a little bit of gap where no one's paying attention to them. That's when they do their big going dark and pulling the 180 and fleeing in the other direction. So they're basically making a run for it when the lights are off, the brief little moment when the lights are off. And so that speaks to a certain level of deception. And again, when you talk to people, you say, well, why did he turn the SDU off? Why would a pilot do this incredibly difficult thing that every 777 pilot I've said to says they don't know how to do it and they wouldn't do it? And the answer is, well, he really wanted to plan the perfect mass murder. He wanted to get away with it scot-free. And so he did all these things. Okay, here's the problem with that. Well, the point being that even murder-suicide people think that deception was a key aspect of this caper. Deception. And so if he wants to... So the problem with that is, okay, he engages in this elaborate game of deception. But another thing that you really can't deny is that as a result of all this happening, almost everyone in the world, except yours truly, is convinced that the captain did it. So this is the great paradox. Two facts of MH370 that seem directly contradictory. One, it was an incredibly successful act of deception, and B, the inescapable conclusion is that the captain did it. That's a really shitty, unsuccessful act of deception if it leaves everyone convinced that you did it. Is that the perfect crime? Not by my book.
Yep.
It's a really failed crime. And yet, so basically, what I'm basically been trying to say for the last 12 years is, what if those facts are not irreconcilable? What if the goal of this sophisticated and elaborate act of deception was that everyone thinks that the captain did it?
There's a lot here to unpack.
An important part of my theory is that if the captain didn't hijack MH370, then someone must have done so by entering the unlocked hatch at the front of the passenger compartment. I wanted to ask John about whether he thought that would be possible.
The operating premise was someone getting into the avionics bay and controlling it. If someone has not been on a 777, to me, again, this is something that's completely plausible. If someone hasn't ridden in business class, especially at night on a 777, like our bay is right when you come in to our supernumerary area. It's a 2.5 by 2.5 foot door that's in the floor. You just open it up. Sometimes it's open up because avionics or maintenance has been down there working on. In a passenger configuration, it's going to be in the same relative spot, if not the exact same spot, because the configurations change on the different planes. But, you think you take off, they do the meal service, all the lights get dimmed in the cockpit. The bathroom probably in that configuration was up there. But, the flight attendants start, their rest cycle if they're going to do that. I mean, again, it's just everything is kind of dark. And, again, it wouldn't be too difficult just to run up there and jump in that bay, I don't think. To open the latch and climb down it. So again,
one thing I wanted to ask you, John, is like, what would you do? Imagine you were like you're in the cruise phase and you've got a whole bunch of hours. You leave your co-pilot to fly, and you go back to just stretch your legs, and you leave the cockpit. You walk back towards the cabin. And you notice that the carpet is like askew. Like, what would you think?
So obviously it's nice that I just fly with boxes, but if I saw that, if that was, we have a little mat over it, if I really noticed like it had moved and and I had been back there and the last person back there, and like if I closed it up, we took off and came back and that mat was moved, you might think you have a stowaway, right? And I could imagine too, if you thought if I'm in a passenger configuration and that was moved, like, well, did someone slip on it and move it? Sometimes I see they do have security tape on them. I don't know what the procedure is to have, like what requires the security tape on it versus not, because again, a lot of our stopovers, they're down there. And you'll see too, like I've had it where they've left the light on down there. You're doing the pre-flight and you can see it coming up from the rudder pedals. So you got to call maintenance to come back out and go turn off the switches and climb down in there. So I can see it, being a couple different, like, hey, did someone walk by? Because ours will move, like it can slip. So you just make the assumption that, oh yeah, someone walked by here, or the drink cart caught it and moved it. Or was it like flipped up? Like the hatch had been opened and then closed. That might be a different case. Like you open it up and peer down there, see if anything's down there, see if you catch a light.
Yeah.
But you should, I would imagine in all configurations, if they turned on a light, that is installed down there, not using a flashlight. And even if they used a flashlight, maybe you would catch a flash underneath the rudder pedals or avionics bay down there. But maybe not. If you're just using a little red light, maybe you don't catch it. So again, there's a lot of...
That's interesting. Yeah. The message I try to tell people is, this is a case that we can solve. There's a lot of threads that we can pick at. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I know what we can do to try. And as long as we have possibilities, I am, it's not a question. Of course, I'm going to try to pick at those threads. But it's great to, John, I really appreciate your interest in it. And it's great. And I love that you can share your perspective as well, because this is what we need. The world is very complex, and expertise is so crucial. You are a legitimate, certified, card-carrying 777 pilot. You have knowledge that only 777 pilots have, and one of the superpower that a journalist has is the ability to go to people in a wide, because I need expertise from 25 different fields in order to solve this mystery. And if you just assume, I assume a 777 pilot would do that, that's when you fall afoul. You have to really try to nail it down, as I said, on the hands and knees with a magnifying glass, and really work through every little detail. And it's fun. I really like it. I mean, it bores people to tears that aren't into it.
Well, it's complex, and the stuff you're talking about, and I think that you're going to be testing, is complex. You're in the beeps and squeaks and hanging on there.
Yeah.
But inherently, the plane is controlled by beeps and squeaks. It's manipulated with a pilot interface that's easy with knobs and buttons to type into. But again, I can envision that there's a lot of computers. I mean, I've seen them. There's a lot of computers downstairs in the avionics bay that, you could manipulate and change things. I don't know.
Complex things happen, and one of the insights that I've had in studying this case is that if you can operate at a higher level of complexity than your adversaries, then you can do things that your adversaries won't understand. And I mentioned that my 14-year-old is now old enough to really get into this case, and he said to me, the thing he said to me sort of warmed the cockles of my heart. He said, Occam's razor, Dad. Simple answers are the best. And I said, simple answers are not adequate for complex phenomena. And if you know that your adversary is going to adopt an Occam's razor mindset, that's basically how magic happens. That's how a stage magician is able to carry out their deception, because they know the audience is going to assume, well, I would never, put a lady into a box with her legs all tucked up so that it looks like her, she's cut in half, Right. So that's how it works. That's how deception works, by understanding the assumptions that your adversary is going to make. And Occam's razor is a big way to put yourself in a box.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack here. So do you think, as we wrap up with the new search that's going on, that, again, they're going to go back out basically at the same spot, just try new technology, and
I'm happy for them if they succeed. I would be happy for this thing to be over. I was a younger man when this thing started. I've got a lot more gray hairs on my head, and I'm ready to move on. I would love to have this thing be done and dusted. Nobody would be awaiting with more anticipation what the black box is going to say happened. And I've sort of been here before, in a way. With Air France 447, we waited 2 years to get the black box data on that. And when it came out, it was absolutely fascinating. Everyone who had made their guesses was wrong. And, it was a sequence of kind of surprising, again, the assumptions, we made a lot of assumptions that were wrong. And we hopefully learned from it. Hopefully that kind of thing is less likely to happen, although very similar things have happened since. But I hope they find it, but I don't think they will. And I hope that once they don't find it, people's little knob will turn a little bit more in the direction of maybe it's not there. That's all I have for you today. I want to once again thank John Waters for having me on his podcast and for sharing his expertise as a 777 pilot. For now, this is Jeff Wise. See you next time.